Hey Lorraine, in this video I am going to explain the basic function and demonstrate the primary movement and posture functions of 4 myofascial lines. I'm going to do the superficial front line, superficial back line, spiral line, and lateral line. I'm also going to do either a yoga pose or a stretch to show you how to stretch all 4 of them independently, and then with a volunteer I'm going to map them out on the body using a series of colored ribbons and labels so you can actually see the tracks, and I'll highlight any body landmarks along the way. So I'm going to start with the superficial front line. Its basic function is to support the entire anterior surface of the body. It runs from the top of the feet up to both sides of the skull in 2 separate pieces. It connects toes to pelvis and pelvis to head. And when the hips are in extension, like in standing, it runs as one uninterrupted line of integrated fascia. Its postural function is to balance the superficial back line. They basically oppose each other. It provides tensile support from the top in order to lift and extend the pelvis, rib cage, and face. It maintains our posture in the sagittal plane as well. All of the muscles which surround the entire surface of the body are protected by the supported by the superficial frontline myofascia, which protects all the viscera of the ventral cavity and supports postural extension of the knees like in standing, which easily makes it the most important myofascial line. Alright, the movement function of the superficial front line, it facilitates flexion of the hips and trunk, so just like in a sit-up. The SFL allows for this movement. It also provides, it facilitates extension of the knee, so it's the eccentric phase of this movement, right there, and also dorsiflexion of the foot. Alright, so the stretch I chose to do the entire superficial front line is a back bridge. So starting position. Some people would want to use a mat. This is a soft floor, so I don't feel the need for it. You want to get down on your back and have your neck and spine be in a neutral position. You're going to want to place the bottoms of your feet firmly on the ground. You're going to take both hands and reach them behind you, planting the palms of your hand flat against the ground just above each shoulder. From there, you're going to push up and get up onto those toes to really stretch out the entire line. So this is the superficial front line. Even though it runs from the top of the feet up to the sides of the skull, I'm going to run through my landmarks top to bottom. Starts at the mastoid process, which is at the bottom of the lateral side of each side of the skull above the mandible. From the sternocleidomastoid, which is on the anterior and superior manubrium and superficial medial third of the clavicle, to the lateral aspect of the mastoid process and interior half of the superficial and neutral line. Down from the sternocleidomanubrium through sternalis and sternocondral fascia, for which I have no demonstration. It connects at the 5th rib, travels through the rectus abdominis, and from the pubic tubercle, which is on the upper border of the medial portion of the superior ramus of the pubis. Also, it comes from the anterior surface of the iliac spine, across from the rectus femoris, from the patella and the tibial tuberosity, which is on the proximal anterior aspect of tibia, which is on the medial side, from the toe extensors and the tibialis anterior. It's also on the dorsal surface of the phalanges, which is the starting point for which I have no demonstration. So next we're doing the superficial back line, contrasting the superficial front. They actually technically join at the peristea surrounding the tip of the toe phalanges, but there's no actual exchange of activity at that site. It functionally, like I said, they basically oppose each other. So they balance each other out. Where we saw the superficial front line extending the toes, we see the superficial back line flexing them, same with the phalanges of the fingers, and it continues in this way up the entire body. The postural function of the superficial back line is to support the entire body when in extension, and it shields us from rolling forward into flexion, which is if the superficial front line was working by itself. Because we maintain this position throughout most of our day, it requires higher concentrations of slow twitch fibers, as well as just all fibers within the working musculature, postural musculature. In addition to slow twitch fibers, we also see maintaining postural position requires heavy sheets and bands within the fascia. These include our Achilles tendon, the entire hamstring group, the sacrotuberous ligament and thoracolumbar fascia, and the cables of the erector spinae and the occipital ridge, which is at the back, the base of the skull. All right, the movement function of the superficial back line is extension and hyperextension everywhere in the body except for at the knees and at the ankles. So extension and hyperextension. And at the knees it does flexion, and at the ankles it does plantar flexion. In infancy, we see the superficial backline muscles lift the baby's head from flexion until the child goes through certain developmental stages, reaching approximately a year old, where they can stand in full extension. All right, the stretch that I've selected for the superficial backline begins in the same starting position as the back bridge. Gonna lay down with your neck and spine in a neutral position, flat on the ground, as well as your arms and palms of your hands flat on the ground. You're going to bring your legs straight up and over, holding normally for 15 seconds, and then gently rolling out of it. All right, this is the superficial back line. Again, I'm going to run through my landmarks top to bottom. Starts at the frontal brow ridge on the anterior side through the gallia aponeurotica and scalp fascia. From the occipital ridge, which is at the posterior base of the skull, through sacrocolumbar fascia, through the erector spinae, which is that entire area, from the sacrum, it travels from to there from the sacrotuberous ligament and sacral fascia, from the ischial tuberosity, which is the small ridge on the distal end of the medial side of the pelvis under the coccyx, from the hamstring group, from the condyles of the femur, which are on the lateral and medial sides of the distal end of the head of femur, across the gastrocnemius, from the calcaneus. And it also gets there through traveling through plantar fascia and the short toe flexors, as well as the plantar surface of the toe phalanges. All right, so next is the lateral line. The lateral line arbitrates movements between the superficial front line and the superficial back line. If you look at its pattern, it starts as a Y in the lower extremities and then is a series of crossing X's. It generates and stabilizes all lateral movements. Its postural function is to balance the anterior and posterior sides of the body, as well as to bilaterally balance our left and right sides. It mediates all activities among the other superficial lines. The superficial front line, the superficial back line, the spiral line, and the arm lines. The movement function of the lateral line is to create a lateral bend in the body, so lateral flexion of the trunk and abduction of the hips, as well as eversion of the foot. It also provides another function by acting as a decelerator for lateral and rotational movements in the trunk, and also its primary purpose is to fix imbalances with every heel strike during walking by making adjustments throughout the tract to maintain our upright posture. So the stretch I've chosen for the lateral line is a yoga pose. It's called camel pose. There's a simple version, a medium version, and a more advanced version. I'm going to do the medium one. Starting position is with your calves flat against the ground, as well as the front of your foot flat against the ground by pointing your toes. They should be running parallel from one another. We're going to put the back into hyperextension and reach down, and I'm going to grab the tops of my toes with the palms of my hand. You hold this pose and you can feel it stretch the entire lateral line.